Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast. I'm your host, as always, Clint McLean. This week, we are going to be breaking down UFC Rochester, and we are going to get right into it. No fun little intro this week, because I'll be honest with you, I'm pissed. As always, we need to go over the results of last week, and I am not looking forward to talking about this. We had the infamous reverse sweep, so we had a bad week the week before last week with only one winning pick, and last week we somehow overcame that and topped it off with a full-on reverse sweep. I honestly feel like I'm cursed at this point. So UFC Brazil could not have gone any worse for us. We went 0-6 for minus 6.36 units. Kurt Holloway got the night started, and honestly, that was a close fight. That was a close pick. We got the dog on it, and I think it was a really good little back and forth. He had a good showing. He landed the shots like I thought he was going to. Unfortunately, he did not have the extra stopping power up a weight class that I thought he was going to have. And that's really kind of part of what we counted on. I thought he was going to have a better gas tank, and I thought he was going to have extra stopping power on his punches, and it just didn't get it done. So the wrestling really weighed heavily with the Brazilian judges, and the Homer got the decision. I can't really fault them there. It was a close fight. It was a close pick and a close dog line. Honestly, if the rest of the night had gone better for us, not a lot of shame in that pick or losing that decision. Little Nog, I underestimated Ryan Spann. I thought Little Nog was going to have a little bit more in the tank, and when he defended that really bad position, when they hit the ground, Ryan Spann went immediately to a high mount, and Nog was in trouble. But he defended that, he shook it off, he got back to the feet, and I thought we were home free. He started throwing and he landed a couple shots on Ryan Spann, and really I expected his punches to sting a lot more than they did apparently, and Ryan Spann came back hard and put him out. So underestimated Ryan Spann a little bit there, and that's basically the only pick on the card that I really regret. I feel like we could have passed on that one and been okay with it. I thought I saw something and I was wrong. So I can't even say that I regret it because I thought I saw something when I made that pick. I just happened to be wrong this time. So Thiago Alves and Jose Aldo, unfortunately, I can't say much more than they didn't show up. They just absolutely did not show up. Thiago Alves and Jose Aldo were almost mirrors of one another in their fights. They did absolutely nothing. They both conceded the first round trying to get the timing and spacing down on their opponents, and that's fine if you're going to crank the offense up in rounds 2 and 3 and come back and try and either put your opponent away or win the fight based on the last 2 rounds. They didn't do either of that, though. Both of them were content to just coast in rounds 2 and 3, and neither really of them got going. Volkanovski put a beautiful performance on Jose Aldo, and I understand that's hard to pull the trigger against. Thiago Alves was dealing with Staropoli, who has got a height and reach advantage on him, and Staropoli may be more legit than I gave him credit for in the last podcast as well, but that fight should have been, both of those fights, should have been a lot closer. And that's really all we were looking for, is they needed to be close, and then the Brazilian favorites would maybe get the split decision nod at home, but they weren't even close. They were just total dismemberment, 30-27 across the board, both fights, because Aldo and Alves didn't do a fucking thing. So that was annoying and frustrating, and it happens. You got to think about other sports in handicapping and sports betting. It's like in basketball. If you bet on the Warriors, and then you find out 5 minutes before tip-off that they're seating the starters, you're not going to win that. You know what I mean? That just, it happens, unfortunately, in sports betting. These are individuals, these are human beings, and sometimes they are not on their game, and we just happened to pick 2 guys that did not show up that night, and it happened on the same night. After that, the night got real ugly, because realistically, if we had won the last 2 bets of the night, it would have been a very small losing night for us, with both of them being underdogs. But the worst of the worst situation possibly happened. I honestly feel like I'm a little cursed at this point. Anderson Silva's leg gives out. He showed me absolutely everything I needed to know in that fight. He took everything. He took absolutely everything that Cannonier had to offer him. He took the shots. He shrugged it off. It was not hurting or affecting him, and he clinched up and had an advantage in the clinch like I thought he would. He got the distance back, and he landed some beautiful body kicks. I really think Anderson Silva would have just eaten him up over the course of 3 rounds. And then he took a big leg kick, and his leg completely gave out. And that's the same leg, I think, that he broke. It wasn't the same area, obviously. It was the knee. It wasn't the shin that gave out. But he came out afterwards saying he'd been having trouble with that knee in training camp as well. So just massively unfortunate injury. We had the better fighter. He was looking good on the night, and kind of got robbed a little bit there, unfortunately, because We needed that fight to continue. It wasn't a knockout. He didn't get, severed from his consciousness. That's when you can be like, oh, okay, he got knocked out cold, whatever. That didn't happen. A freak accident happened where his leg buckled and gave out with way less damage than it ever should in any other fight or situation. So that one sucked. And then we got to Thug Rose, and I was going nuts. Thug Rose controlled that fight from bell to bell. That was the best performance that we have ever seen out of Thug Rose Namajunas. She was looking like an absolute monster. And then, I don't even want to talk about it. And then fucking Andrade grabs her and throws her on her head. And I thought Rose was dead. I'm not even kidding. Like, my very first thought was, I hope Rose is okay. Like, I didn't care for 2 seconds about my bet at that point because I thought they were going to have to cart her out on like a stretcher or something because the way she landed on her head and neck was brutal to watch. And I just can't believe that we're in the driver's seat. We're in full control. We're at least going to avoid the entire reverse sweep and get a little of our hard-earned cash back. And Andrade gets 1 second. 1 second of control and she ends the fight. That hurts so bad. That hurts so bad. One thing that you've got to think about, this is why we love MMA, and this is why it is hard to bet MMA, is because Andrade needed 1 tiny second to end that fight and change the entire course of our night. And you want to think about this. Rose controlled the entire first round and everything up until that point in the second round. If you think about like a baseball game, for example, your team is in control. They get up, let's say 3-4 home runs, right? It's 4-0, all right, in this baseball game. It's 4-0 and you've bet on the favorite. And we're in the bottom of the 7th inning. And one dude steps up and you know what? He gets the ball just right. He gets that perfect explosion. He gets just the right angle. He sends it off into left field and just hits it out of the park. You know what happens? You know what happens when that happens in baseball? The score is 4-1. In MMA, the score is 5-4. That's the difference here. People don't seem to get that. When you're ahead in MMA, it doesn't mean shit. It's not over until the final bell. And people really need to understand that. And that's why this sport is so freaking awesome to watch and such a good sport to be a fan of. But it's also why it's so hard and dangerous to bet. So there you have it. There's the recap of the reverse sweep. And I mean, really, like I said, Little Nog might have been the only bet that I really would have wanted to avoid there. I mean, I know some people were high on Volkanovski, and props to them. He is legit. He absolutely is legit. If you can do what he did to Jose Aldo, that's fantastic. But even Jose Aldo came out afterward and released a statement and said that's the worst he's fought in his entire life. He didn't know why he couldn't pull the trigger. And that's saying something. If the fighter in the cage comes out and is like, man, I was not me, there's nothing you can do. There's absolutely nothing you can do. So the main 4 picks that we did, I don't feel bad about whatsoever. Phenomenally bad luck that they all went down the tubes the way that they did. Kurt Holloway was a coin flip where we were getting some dog money, and that's all you're looking for. So I don't feel bad about that. Little Nog, sure, maybe we could have passed, but even then we have an 0-5 night instead of an 0-6 night, so it's not really that great. So just a bad night. Let's shake it off. Let's get rid of it. Get rid of that bad energy. Throw some salt over your shoulder, go ask your priest for a blessing, get some holy water and dump it on your head, take a bath in tomato sauce, whatever you want to do. We're going to shake this thing off and turn this boat around because it's time. The record, unfortunately, has taken a hit. We are now 55-48. We are still plus 27.6 units for the year of 2019. So even though the record doesn't look nearly as impressive right now, we're still up damn near 30 units. So people turning on me online, people calling for me to, hang them up and say that I'm done for and I don't know what I'm talking about. And shut up. Shut up. Go crawl back in the hole that you came from. We're still up 27 units. And that is champion pro level shit. All right. People who do this professionally, which I do not, by the way. I'm just some guy that likes MMA and likes to bet sitting in his freaking garage doing this show. So people who professionally bet sports at the end of a season, if they're up 27 units, that's a damn good season. We're not even halfway through the year yet. So shut up. So just to give you all a little bit of a heads up, this is a very awkward card. The plays are going to be weird. The fight breakdowns are going to be weird. I may mention some of the fights just because of how interesting they are. I want you all to understand exactly what's going on this card, but we're going to have to be very, very careful this card. Not because I'm scared, not because I've lost my edge, because it's that kind of a card. And people out there on Twitter who are throwing around how confident they are on these picks and plays this week, I have no idea how they're doing that. And I'll tell you why. So let's get into it. Starting off the night, we've got Julio Arce facing Juliana Rosa, and this is just a one-sided beatdown type of fight. Julio Arce opened up as a minus 550 favorite. He has been bet all the way up to minus 700 in places. And this is a spot where, really, the whole card, for the most part, the lines are so wide this week. And it blows me away how wide these lines are. And you're going to say, so Clint, that means we're going to bet a lot of dogs this week, right? That's what we do. When there's line value on the dog, you bet the dog. No, not this week. Because this week, even though the lines are wide, I agree with most of the favorites actually winning. I don't see a lot of these dogs actually pulling through. So even though the lines are long and the odds are wide and they're juicy dogs, we're not going to stab on too many of them because I really think we would be lighting money on fire. Julio Arce is better than Juliana Rosa basically everywhere, and I think this is a complete mismatch. I think Julio Arce gets it done before the final bell. He probably finishes Arosa, and I just don't understand why anyone would take a shot on Arosa, except for maybe the line, like I mentioned, being as wide as it is. So we're just going to pass. Unfortunately, we are just going to have to pass on this one because unless you want to throw Julio Arce into a parlay, which I have no problems with, there's just not much else to do with this fight. Now, the second fight of the night is Zach Cummins 22-6-0 versus Trevon Giles 11-0, and this is a interesting fight. This is one I'm very interested in. Zach Cummins is a very, very well-rounded fighter. He's moving up a weight class to 185, and he seems to be improved up at 185, but he is getting a little bit older. He's 34 years old. He was a big guy down at 170, but he's kind of middle of the road up at 185. He's not going to be the biggest guy. He's not going to have that physical imposing presence up a weight class. Trevon Giles is a real hot prospect. He comes to us out of the LFA. He fought Jan Blachowicz and KO'd him. He fought Antonio Braga, Neto BJJ, and KO'd him in round 3 as well. Both of those very impressive wins to get your career started in the UFC. Antonio Braga, Neto BJJ is a guy who's actually very similar in my mind to Zach Cummins. I know they really are completely different fighters, but for the sake of breaking this fight down, they've got a lot of similarities. Braga has a bad gas tank, and he's all about the ground game. He is a legit Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and Trevon Giles was able to defend the takedowns, get back to his feet, and then once Braga gassed out, he KO'd him in the third round. But I'll be honest with you, I think if this went to the judges, that probably is a decision win for Braga, because he got several takedowns throughout that fight, and Trevon Giles didn't really have anything for him. Once he was on his back, there wasn't a whole lot he could do. He defended well, he didn't give up the sub, but he really didn't have much of a way to get up and escape. I think Zach Cummins can have that same exact advantage here. I think Zach Cummins is a better wrestler than Braga BJJ was, and he has a better gas tank than Braga BJJ. He also is a legit Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt himself, and he's actually got 11 submission wins on his record. Half of his 22 wins have come by submission. So I think there's a real threat that Zach Cummins submits Trevon Giles here. However, Zach Cummins is getting a little bit older. Trevon Giles is going to be the younger, larger, more explosive and athletic opponent here, so he may be able to use his footwork and keep this thing on the outside and blast Zach Cummins. Now, Cummins has decent knockout power, but he's got very awkward striking, and he does have some heavy hands, but he comes from weird angles. He doesn't throw anything the way that you would expect it to, and I don't know if he'll be able to actually clip Trevon Giles. If Cummins can get this to the ground, he stands a legitimate shot to win by submission, and maybe he can even grind out Trevon Giles. Now, Trevon Giles did take the last year or so off. From what I understand, he may have had a back surgery. He joined the police force. He had a kid. So, unfortunately, I'm going to have to take a pass on this fight. my soul is screaming at me to bet Zach Cummings. I really want to bet Zach Cummings as a plus 135 underdog because I think he's very, very live here. But the problem is we don't know, A, how much has Zach Cummings faded now that he's getting a little bit older. I do think he's slowing down ever so slightly. And B, how much is that year off going to affect Trevin Giles? Because if he took a year off and he healed up over the course of that time, he could come back being even more impressive. But if he took that year off and he joined the police force and he became a dad, he may have slowed down. What if he's actually lost a little skip in his step? And if he's lost a skip in his step, then Zach Cummings is live as hell here. So I don't feel comfortable putting my money on either one of these guys in this particular fight. I think a fresh Trevin Giles that we have seen recently beats Zach Cummings in their current states. But a slightly wilted Trevin Giles has a very good shot of getting just out grappled by Zach Cummings because he's a pressure beast. Like, he's just going to keep on coming. Unless Trevin Giles is able to put him away and knock him out cold, Zach's not going to stop. So, unfortunately, we got to pass on here. We'll wait till the weigh-ins. We'll see kind of how they look face-to-face. If Cummins looks a little bigger than I expect him to when they actually get next to each other, if Giles looks maybe sucked out, looks like he's having a hard weight cut, if you don't see that muscle definition that you're looking for an in-shape, in-camp type of fighter, maybe we take a shot on Zach Cummins. We also keep an eye on that line. If it gets wider and wider and wider, if we get up to plus 160, plus 170, that is going to warrant a shot on Cummings. I don't know if it'll get that high because I think there will be some buyback at that point, but that's kind of my game plan on this one. We're going to pass, but we're going to keep a very close eye on it. The next fight on the card is Pat Cummings 10-6-0 versus Ed Herman 23-14-0. Ed Herman and Pat Cummings at this point are hitting the dinosaur stage of their careers. Both men are 38 years old, so they're knocking on the door of 40. Ed Herman was on The Ultimate Fighter Season 3. I'm a huge fan of short fuse myself. He was one of those guys that he was on The Ultimate Fighter and he kind of looked like a beast, and then he disappeared for a couple of years. When he resurfaced, he's had a real spotty off and on career in the UFC, and it's been kind of a disappointment, unfortunately, to watch him go the way he has up and down. The last year or two, he's really fought the bottom level of the division. I mean, he lost by TKO to Derek Brunson in 2015. That's what Derek Brunson does, right? If he's faster and more explosive than you, he KOs you, especially back a couple years ago before anybody knew how to really take care of that style. So then he bounces back with a big knockout win over Tim Boetsch in round 2, and that one floored me. I was so excited about that win because I'm such a big fan of Ed Herman's, and I'm actually a fan of Tim Boetsch too, but I really thought Boetsch was going to be the one getting the better of that fight. Herman flatlined him. It was crazy. So then he gets Nikita Krylov, which, bad matchup for him. He's getting fed to people at that point. He gets KO'd in the second round. So he goes KO, 2 against him, 1 for him. And then he faces CB Dollaway in 2017. And that was a nice back and forth kind of fight. And that's the one we're going to get most of our read for this fight from. CB Dollaway and Pat Cummins are very, very similar in the way that they fight. They're both wrestlers that have a little bit of a chin issue. CB Dollaway is more of a jiu-jitsu player, married with his wrestling technique. But Pat Cummins is going to be a little bigger and a little bit stronger of a wrestler. However, I see these fights being very, very similar. If Pat Cummins can dictate the pace the way CB did, if Pat Cummins can get in on Ed Herman and protect his chin the way that CB did, Herman's not going to have enough on his back to submit him. Herman needs to clip him coming in and clip him hard coming in. Now, just like he did with Tim Boetsch with the knee back in 2016, he's got the power to put a guy like Pat Cummins out. But Cummins is such a good wrestler. Cummins is a much, much higher level wrestler, and he's coming off of a decision loss to a guy like Corey Anderson, who in my opinion is on the rise. Corey Anderson is one of those fighters at 205 that is finally starting to put it together. He had some potential, and he really just wasn't living up to it for the longest time. Well, now he finally is, and Corey was able to go all 3 rounds with him in their contest. Now, he got handled, but he didn't get knocked out either. He got submitted by Misha Serkinov, so he didn't get knocked out in that one. His last knockout came at the hands of Little Nog, which, right in the heart. Someone pull the knife out of my heart, please. Rogerio Nogueira knocked him out back in 2016. Glover Teixeira knocked him out before that in 2015. OSP knocked him out before that in 2015. So all of those knockouts came to relatively high-tier knockout artists, right? OSP's got power. Glover Teixeira's got power. We know Little Nog had power, especially back, 3 years ago. So Ed Herman in 2019, does he have the kind of power that it takes to knock out Pat Cummins? I don't think he does. He went to a split decision with Gian Villante, who, again, kind of a bottom feeder at this point in the UFC. He lost a split, so it was close. I really think you could have given Ed Herman the win in that fight. But again, he didn't hurt or knock out Gian Villante. CB Dollaway is chinny as hell, and he decided to grapple with him for the most part and didn't knock him out. He lost a decision there. So I really see Patrick Cummins dominating this fight with his wrestling. He knows better than to strike with a power puncher, and he knows to protect himself in this case. This is also another reverse line movement type of situation. Pat Cummins opened as a minus 240 favorite, and according to SBR odds, 95% of the money has come in on Ed Herman because he's a big, juicy plus 200 underdog. That line's only gotten better. He's now up to plus 210 over at Pinnacle and 5 times. So 95% of the money has come in on Ed Herman, and Pat Cummins is becoming a bigger favorite. He's moving to minus 241 at Pinnacle, minus 250 at 5 times. So if that says anything to you, the money that they trust or the money that they care about is going on Patrick Cummins, and I completely agree. The problem is the line is too wide. He's not a guy that you want to risk that minus 241 kind of juice on because of the chin issues. And because both these are 38-year-old men, both of them could be fading from fight to fight more than we have any idea. Now, the difference between the two is, once again, we've got to see Patrick Cummins a lot lately. He fought in April of 2018 against Corey, where he looked pretty dang good. And then he fought Serkinov in October of 2018, where, again, he got submitted in the first round, but that's because Serkinov is a beast. Serkinov had every physical advantage on him, and he couldn't get the takedown. He got submitted when it hit the ground, and there's not a whole lot to really draw from that. We did see Herman fight Gian Villante in 2018, but again, that went 3 rounds against a bottom feeder, not a top-tier guy, not a mid-tier guy, a bottom feeder guy, and he didn't look overly impressive and didn't even get it done. So I think Pat Cummins is in slightly better form towards the end of his career here than Ed Herman is. Ed Herman's got some miles on him, and I hate to say it, but I really think Pat Cummins gets it done this fight. The next fight I'm just going to kind of sprinkle over. Mike Trizano's fighting Grant Dawson, and this is a young, hungry lion, up-and-coming type of fight. Both guys are very impressive and very young in their MMA careers. Mike Trizano came off The Ultimate Fighter, and he beat Luis Pena, Violent Bob Ross, in his most recent fight. It's happening down at 145. Grant Dawson, 13-1 versus Mike Trizano's 8-0. This is going to be a super interesting contested fight. Mike Trizano's 27, Grant Dawson's 25. They're both rapidly improving. They've both got really high-level skills in different areas, and I really expect it to be kind of a scrambly back-and-forth kind of fight, and I do not have any idea what's going to happen. I'm only mentioning it because this is one to watch. I leaned Mike Trizano early on, but then as I kind of dove into it and studied it and looked at the matchup, it's too close. It's way too close to call. And the line kind of speaks to that. Trizano opened up as a minus 150, and he's been bet down to minus 129 over at Pinnacle, but he's still up as high as minus 145 at places like Bovada and 5 times. So the line is narrowing. Most of the money's coming in on Dawson as the underdog here. So I think this thing might kick off as a pick'em, and I just think that's right. So I don't see any line value on this one. I'm just going to completely pass and stay away from it, but this one might be the fireworks fight of the night as far as young up-and-coming contenders goes. Next, we've got Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts facing Mikel Pereira, and this one's another one super weird and interesting. Kind of like Pat Cummins and Ed Herman, Danny Roberts is just inconsistent. He's 16-4-0. He's got 5 wins in the UFC, and he only has lost to guys that are kind of middle to the road. You know, Mike Perry, Nordine Taleb, Claudio Henrique da Silva. These are guys that are staples of the UFC. They're not title challengers or anything like that, but at the same time, they're not bottom feeders either. Some of them have some promise. So not great losses, but not really bad losses either. Now let's look at his wins. So of his opponents, as far as UFC careers goes, he fought Nathan Coy, who he defeated by guillotine choke. He had 1 win out of his 3 UFC fights. Now we look over at Dominic Steele. Dominic Steele got into the UFC and he got 1 as well. He got 1 out of 4. So he's got 2 UFC wins. Let's see here. He fought Bobby Nash, who went 0-3 in the UFC, and then he fought Oliver the Future Incamp, who is 0-2 in the UFC. So last on the list is David Zagat Sawada, and he is 0-2 in the UFC as well. So out of the opponents that Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts has faced, there are 2 UFC victories among them, and that just doesn't inspire much confidence. Basically, the guys that he is defeating don't belong in the UFC. Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts is a measuring stick for what it means. Do you belong in the UFC or do you not? He's not a gatekeeper in the sense that he's going to keep guys from getting to the title. He's the octagon gatekeeper. He is the UFC's 170-pound gatekeeper. If you can beat Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts, you belong in the UFC. If you lose to Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts, then you don't belong anywhere near this level of competition. He's got some sharp boxing skills. I really like his striking, but he also has a very questionable chin. He's been KO'd more than once, and it doesn't take a whole lot to get it done. Now, this Michael Pereira guy, I think he's kind of a viral guy. They want him in because of eyes. He's gone viral on Twitter doing like the backflips off the cage, and when guys are down on the ground, instead of just kind of kicking their legs and letting them back up like most people do, he does these weird capoeira like kicks and throws and flips and tries to like land on them instead, and it's all really flashy low-level shit. And it's not going to work at the higher level. It's not going to work in the UFC. He's 21-9, and all of the most recent wins that he has, are not all of them, sorry, but a lot of them are against guys that are very low-level regional competition. Overweight dudes. His last win in the first round against Won Jun Choi, he blitzes the dude from a mile away and connects with his jaw, pops his head back, and it's over. But anybody with decent, respectful striking is going to see that coming a mile away. He leaves his chin out there, and honestly, the one time in the last couple of fights, back in December of 2018, he fought this kid, Dusko Tordovic, he's from Serbia, and this kid is legit. I mean, he's 8-0, he's an upcoming prospect, and he starched him in the first round. And that's kind of what I expect to happen here. I think that kid is legit, and it showed this guy where he really stands on the pecking order. I think he's kind of a bully, honestly. I think he's the kind of fighter that thinks he's a badass, and he wants to feel dominant, and he wants to kick ass, but when it gets tough, he goes belly up. So I don't see him lasting long in the UFC. Now, due to Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts' chin issues, he might catch him with one of these blitzes, because he does unload on these blitzes. But outside of that, I feel like his striking is really kind of rudimentary, and I expect Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts to be able to piece him up. I don't know if Hot Chocolate gets him out of there, though, is the problem, because I was looking at Roberts winning inside the distance, and he is plus 130 inside the distance. Unfortunately, I don't know how questionable Michael's chin is, because he's only been submitted once and KO'd once. So it's not like he's been roughed up and taken a whole bunch of damage or anything like that. 7 of his 9 losses have come by decision. So I think that the line is about right, but Roberts is another one of those guys that I just don't really like to trust. I mean, laying the kind of juice that you've got to with him, it's just like laying it with Pat Cummins. Minus 250, he's not the kind of guy I like to lay minus 250 on. So we're going to put a pin in that one, because I do like Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts to win, but I'm not exactly sure how I want to play it. Next up, we've got Desmond Green, 22-8-0, a legit lightweight prospect, facing Charles Jourdain, who is 9-1-0. And this is another squash match, ladies and gentlemen. Desmond Green opened up as a minus 510, and he has also been bet all the way up to minus 650 and minus 700. So this kid, Charles Air Jordan, is stepping in to face Desmond Green, and he's 9-1-0. He's got 6 KOs and 3 submissions. He's another one of those guys that looks exactly like you want him to on the regional scene. He's putting absolutely everyone away. But he's stepping up and facing a massive, massive challenge in front of him in Desmond the Predator Green, who really looks like he's going to be something in the UFC. So we're just staying clear of this one. I'm going to point it out because it's a minus 550. I know a lot of people parlaying this one as well, throwing it in, 3 and 4 teamers, because that's kind of what you got to do to find a good spot or an even money spot on this card. So I fully expect Des Green to get it done and get it done early. But you never know. With this kid coming in 9-1-0, maybe he puts up a fight. We'll just have to kind of keep an eye on it and see. Closing out the preliminary card, we've got Aspen Ladd taking on Sijara Eubanks. And for those that don't know, this is a rematch, and it's our first women's fight of the night. Aspen Ladd is 7-0 facing Sijara Eubanks, who is 4-2 with a very misleading record. She's a legit fighter, and she was on The Ultimate Fighter, so we should be able to credit her with a couple more wins than that. And one of those losses, obviously, is to Aspen Ladd. So this one is gonna get hairy. Their first fight was a real back-and-forth type of striking affair, and Aspen Ladd got the unanimous nod. However, I think it was a lot closer than that. If a different set of judges is sitting there watching that, it's a split decision instead of a unanimous one, and everyone's got to sweat just a little bit. So this is another spot where I completely agree with the line, except it's too wide. Aspen Ladd is a minus 300 favorite, and most of the money's come in on Sijara Eubanks, but the line just hasn't moved. It stayed right where it's at, and that's because I think the bookmakers don't want to give any more value on Ladd because she probably just wins this one. Sijara Eubanks is she's good on the ground, she's got a good jiu-jitsu game, she's athletic, her striking has been improving, but I think Aspen Ladd is improving just a hair more than Sijara has. And she's been putting girls away by KO too. She KO'd Lena Landsberg and Tanya Evinger, whereas Sijara Eubanks is grinding by ladies like Lauren Murphy and Roxanne Modafferi. I think that both of them are improved. I think we're going to get a very interesting rematch. It should be a back and forth kind of affair, but they're both very solid grapplers, which means they're both probably just going to stand and strike, and I expect it to be a hairy back and forth type of striking match. Aspen Ladd probably gets the nod, but Sijara Eubanks, I know a lot of people taking a shot on her at this line because she is live, and that's a lot of juice just kind of hanging out there at plus 250, but I think Ladd gets it done. So as much as I would love to say, hey, we got our first big plus 250 dog on the night, I can't. I just can't, because I really feel like Aspen Ladd gets it done. The main card kicks off with Davi Hamosh facing Austin Hubbard. Davi is 9-2-0, Hubbard is 10-2-0, and Davi is another massive favorite. He's another one who is just on the positive side of a squash match. Davi looks like about minus 450, minus 470. He opened at minus 450, so it's not as much of a landslide as some of those other favorites are. Austin Hubbard is making his UFC debut. He's another grinder, and Davi Hamosh is a real talented submission fighter. So the fact that this kid's got wrestling and submissions really is kind of interesting, because Hamosh mostly submits everybody. He's got 9 wins, 7 of them by submission. So if this is going to be a ground affair, this unknown Austin Hubbard's having a ground game makes it a little bit interesting. I expect Davi to get it done. He's got way more UFC experience. His only loss came to Sergio Moraes back in 2017. So he's really proven himself to belong at this level where Austin Hubbard has yet to. And Davi is a massive step up in competition. And unfortunately, the line is just too wide for us to play anything on there, because even though we like to fade people coming up in competition, it is not my style to lay minus 400. The next fight is Charles Do Bronx Oliveira facing Nick Lentz. Charles Oliveira is 26-8-0, facing off against 39-2 Nick Lentz. And this is a round 3. This is a rubber match between these guys. And I don't understand what they're doing here. I mean, I think maybe they just want to keep Oliveira rolling. He's on a 4-fight win streak right now, and he's choked out everybody in his last 4 fights. Nick Lentz is one of those guys that's just not all that impressive. Even when he does impressive things, he's just not that impressive. And he's already fought Oliveira twice. The first one was a no contest due to an illegal knee, and the second one was a submission guillotine in the 3rd round. So I think he believes he still stands a shot here. The bookmakers don't necessarily agree. The way Oliveira has been going, he's been winning in the 1st and 2nd round basically every single fight. His submission game is on point. He finally seems to have hit his stride. He was such an up and down kind of fighter, hot and cold, hot and cold. He seems to have finally put it together, and we're seeing what we always wanted to see out of Charles do Bronx Oliveira. But he is another one of those fighters that I have a real hard time pegging. So he opened up at minus 380, and most of the money has come in on Nick Lentz, and I agree with that actually, because Nick Lentz was able to take him into the third round, which is a lot of times where Charles Oliveira will tend to quit. So if you're getting plus 300, plus 280, that kind of a number on Nick Lentz, that's not so bad, because you don't need him to win every single time for that to pay off. That is a wide line. But I think Charles Oliveira gets it done. Really pisses me off when this keeps happening, because I really think Oliveira wins this thing. And I don't have enough confidence in a guy like Lentz to say that it gets done. I mean, you can get Lentz by 3-round decision at plus 475, and that's juicy. That looks delicious. But I don't know if he can get that out of there. I don't know if he can survive that long. I mean, the fight going the 3-round distance at plus 205, that's not bad. You can get Oliveira inside the distance at minus 190, and this is just one more fight where I am scared shitless to make a pick, simply because I don't want to lay that kind of cash with Charles Oliveira, because he's a bed shitter and he's facing a real strong grappler in Nick Lentz that was able to defend himself up until the very end the last time they fought, who went to decision with a guy like David Tamor and Islam Makhachev. I mean, he's not bad. So I think Oliveira wins, but I don't know if and when he gets the submission, and I don't know if he doesn't quit in the last round, if Nick is improved enough to put him on him once he gasses out, because that is a thing that Oliveira does. Now, Nick is 34 years old, so he is getting a little older, and like I said, Charles is coming into his prime. Rematches generally go to the younger fighter. I think Oliveira is the pick here, but I'm just not touching minus 345 with Charles Oliveira. I can't. Up next is Vicente Luque, another massive favorite who's facing a last notice late replacement, and he was already a big favorite. I expect him to be minus 1200 in this kind of a fight with someone stepping up on a week's notice to fight freaking Vicente Luque. So we're not getting anywhere near this one, but it will be an interesting way to see this kid get jumped into the UFC, because that's basically what they do. They throw him to the wolves for their first fight because they have no time to prepare, and then they give him another match that's a softer match with a full camp. So, poor kid's going to get sacrificed to Vicente Luque just for the sake of the card. Then we've got Megan Anderson taking on Felicia Spencer, and this is a very, very interesting fight. Megan Anderson is 9-3-0, and Felicia Spencer is 6-0, and she's making her UFC debut. I know a lot of people who are on... Well, actually, I know a lot of people that are split. This fight is highly contested. I know several people who are backing Megan Anderson. She's tall, she's long, she's got very impressive striking, she's strong for her size, but she has very questionable takedown defense. She fought Holly Holm back in June of 2018, and she lost a 3-round decision to Holm, which a young up-and-coming fighter, you'd expect her to lose that kind of fight. But the biggest story was Holly Holm being able to take her down kind of at will. I mean, she defended a couple of them, but Holly Holm is no takedown specialist herself. Now, after that fight, she faces Kat Zingano, and my heart breaks over that fight because I was all over Kat Zingano when they fought in December. And that was, by the way, we're coming off of one of my worst cards of all time, but December 2018, the finale card was one of my worst cards of all time. And that's another fight where just everything broke against me. Kat Zingano got TKO'd via eye poke. Now, we've seen a couple of high kicks, head kicks that have poked the eye. The referee steps in, gives them a chance. But in this case, the ref just stared at her. Kat got poked in the eye by Megan's toe defending a head kick, and the ref didn't do a damn thing. He just kind of was like, what are you doing? Fight. And so when Megan stepped in to start throwing punches, the ref had to save her, and the only way to save a fighter as a referee is to wave the fight off. So Megan wins. Now, any other eye poke that's going to happen going forward via foot, we've already seen a couple of them actually, and the ref calls it like a finger eye poke. He gives them a second to recover, because they deserve that. But Kat was the first unfortunate victim of that, and so was my wallet. So Megan Anderson has a win over Kat Zingano on her record. but it really isn't a win over Kat Zingano. Now, she did look good. I will say she looked very, very impressive at the beginning of that fight. She was monitoring the range well. She was keeping Kat at bay. She was throwing some heavy shots. I think Felicia's going to have a hard time getting in and taking Megan down. She has this very stumbling kind of takedown offense. She leaves her chin wide open. She looks like she's going to kind of throw an elbow and then just covers her head to protect herself while she dives in there. I think if Megan can put a hand on her and use some footwork and back away from her when she does that, she'll be able to land knees and uppercuts all day. Now, the only problem with that is if she does throw knees, which are very prolific in her arsenal, if she throws those knees, Felicia can catch those. So Felicia can put her down by taking advantage of Megan's offense. And if Megan does get put on her back on the ground, Felicia's a phenomenal grappler and submission artist. So Megan may not get back up if this fight hits the ground. I think this is a crazy, crazy fight where whoever implements their game plan wins. If Felicia is forced to stand and bang with Megan, she's gonna drop. You're not gonna be able to take the kind of heat that Megan can put on you. Now, if Megan, on the other hand, gives up the takedown, I think Felicia chokes her out. And I know I sound kind of like an idiot saying, well, whoever, does what they do wins the fight. Well, duh. No fucking duh, idiot. What are we listening to your podcast for? This is one of those circumstances where both of these girls are kind of specialists. And because they specialize in the other's weakness. Neither of them has the tools to defend what the other does. So I think this gets finished. I'm going to look at the total on this fight when it drops. It's not out at the moment, but when the total comes out, if they're giving me a 2.5, I'm probably going to play the under on this fight because I think either Felicia goes out on our shield with an uppercut or a knee, or Megan's going to give up the takedown in maybe round 2 when things start getting a little hairy. She starts getting a little tired. She's done a little more grappling than she's used to, and Felicia locks up a sub. So again, no pick at this point. I'm not picking a side. I have a small lean to Megan Anderson. If you want to know, which way I'm going here, I lean Megan Anderson. But unfortunately, Megan Anderson is the favorite here. She's sitting at about minus 160 and minus 180. And I think that's wide. I think this is a much closer fight than that is. If I could get her at a pick'em, or if I could get her at a plus 110, I know that's not going to happen, but if for argument's sake I could, I'd be all over Megan Anderson here. Even as low as like minus 110, minus 125, maybe I'd take a shot, because that's about where I see it. But minus 185, minus 165, that's way too much juice for this fight. It's way closer than that. Now we come to the co-main event of the evening. Antonio Carlos Jr. faces Ian the Hurricane Heinz. And this is the one and only pick on the entire card so far. I tweeted out Ian Heinz at plus 160. And this is the one that I've been waiting for. So you're welcome. If you follow me on Twitter, you snag that plus 160. It's been bet down to plus 146, plus 150. That 160 is gone. And all the money is coming in on Ian. So I think this fight gets closer and closer as we get to fight time. Antonio Carlos Jr. is no joke. He's on a 5-fight win streak. He choked out Jack Marshman. He choked out Tim Bosch. He choked out Eric Spicely. He choked out Leonardo Guimarães. I don't know why Garcia popped into my head there. Anyway, before that, he got KO'd by old man Dan Kelly, and that's where you start to question things. He has a bit of a questionable chin. When he gets popped, he wobbles, and that's where Ian's toughness really comes into play. That's where that dog money comes into play. If this is a pick'em fight, I probably have to go with Antonio Carlos Jr. because his submission game, he's one of those fighters who realized he had a weakness. He understood that his chin was a bit of a problem, and he has adapted his game to make sure he doesn't get hit that often. So if he can get this fight to the ground, he will submit basically everybody because he is legit on the ground. Ian Heinz, however, is ever improving, and his nickname, the Hurricane, is perfect for this kid. He does not stop coming forward. He has good submission defense. He's got excellent wrestling. He's a pressure fighter, and he just overwhelms and breaks his opponents. And that's where I think he knows what he's doing. He absolutely knows what he's doing. He knows he's getting into a fist fight with a guy that wants to take him down and choke him. His wrestling defense is going to be on point. His last fight got canceled, and I'm so bummed about that because he was a nice, juicy dog in that fight. And the pictures that he was posting, he was in shape. Like, oh my God, he was ready to break someone's face. I was so excited for that last fight. And I think it's going to be about the same thing here. He's coming in motivated. This is only going to be his second UFC fight. So diving right into the deep end against a guy like Antonio Carlos Jr. is a tall order. But I think he can get it done. And at plus 160, plus 170, if you're looking at those kind of dog odds, that's what we need to roll the dice on Ian the Hurricane Heinisch. If he can defend a couple takedowns, if he can defend a couple submissions, get this thing into round 2, he's going to be the fresher fighter. He's going to be the one dictating the pace. He's going to put it on Antonio Carlos Jr. And so if he can just keep himself from getting submitted, I think he overwhelms ACJ and wins. Tall order. I understand that. But he's the one dog I see with a very, very real shot of winning the fight. That brings us to the main event of the evening, Rafael dos Anjos facing Kevin Lee. And you know both of those names and they're lightweights, but this fight is happening at 170. Kevin Lee has finally made the move up to 170 pounds because he just cannot cut down to 155 any longer. He is too big for the division. And I think that's a good choice. I think he belongs at 170. He's one of those weird guys that's a little too short, so he's probably not going to go ultra far at the 170 weight class. If they had a 160 weight class, I think he'd be perfect for it. He's exactly the kind of guy that you want for a 160 weight class because he would thrive at that weight class. 155 is a little too small, 170 is just a little too big. Anyway, he's fighting another guy who's in the exact same boat. Rafael dos Anjos was killing himself cutting to 155 and looked like he was the best lightweight we had ever seen for a while there, and then it really took its toll on him. He lost by KO to Eddie Alvarez, and then he dropped a decision to Tony Ferguson. He came up to 170 and started putting it on fools. He beat Neil Magny, he beat Tarek Saffiedine, he actually won a unanimous decision against freaking Robbie Lawler. He was on a tear at 170. He looks good at 170. And then they threw him to the deep end. He fought Colby Covington and Kamaru freaking Usman, who's the champion now at 170, if you didn't know. Those two guys are pressure wrestlers for days, and Rafael dos Anjos did not wilt. He went a full 5 rounds with the number 1 and number 2 guys in the division. The number 1 guy who now is the champion in the division, and the number 2 who is now the number 1. These are the pinnacle of 170, and Rafael dos Anjos went 5 rounds with both of them. He busted up Colby Covington a couple of times. He landed some decent shots on Usman, but that one was a little more one-sided. But he never wilted. He didn't take enough damage to break. He never gave up, and he counter-wrestled his ass off. He looked good at moments in both of those fights. So he is a tall order here for Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee got subbed by Tony Ferguson back in 2017, and again, I know that's Tony Ferguson who looks like he's ready for the title, and I know he had a staph infection, so you want to say, oh, you know what, he gassed out. He was at 155, so he was gassing out every time. He came back against Edson Barboza and looked like a monster. He got the TKO stoppage late in round 5, so he showed he can go the distance against a guy like Edson Barboza, which is very impressive, but he got wobbled. Oh, did he get wobbled in that fight. I need a GIF. Somebody look online and find a GIF of that and share that with me, because when he did the chicken leg dance after getting kicked by Edson Barboza, that was a beautiful moment. It was hilarious. I thought it was over. So then he faces Al Iaquinta. The Al Iaquinta who just so recently lost to Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Fuck me, another loser. So Al Iaquinta takes Kevin Lee the full 5 rounds and basically murks him. He looks murks is the wrong word because that's the term you use when they put somebody out cold. He just dominated him. Kevin Lee had some moments in that fight, but Al basically shut down his entire offense. So the last 2 fights, he went full 5 rounds. He looked okay in one, he looked kind of bad in the other, and now he's popping up to 170. So what are we going to get out of Kevin Lee when he jumps up to 170? And that's where the giant question mark in this fight comes from. This is lined at a pick'em. It opened up with Rafael dos Anjos being a ever so slight favorite at minus 115, Kevin Lee minus 105. 56% of the money has come in on Kevin Lee. However, this is another little reverse line movement type of situation where the line either has not moved, or over at Bookmaker, Rafael dos Anjos has bumped down to a minus 128. And that, I think, right there is the secret. Even though it's tiny, even though it's baby, Rafael dos Anjos has the edge here. This is a very close fight with some massive questions surrounding it because Kevin Lee moving up to 170 may look like a runaway freight train. if he has a better gas tank because he's got those extra 10, 15 pounds on him, he could be a monster. If his punches has just that much more pop on them because he's got that extra weight on him, he could be a monster. However, Kevin Lee has the benefit of seeing what Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington did to Rafael dos Anjos. So the game plan is written out for him. He knows he needs to chain grapple Rafael dos Anjos for 5 rounds and keep him on the back pedal. Rafael dos Anjos is a much more crisp striker than Kevin Lee is, and Kevin Lee thinks he's a striker. So I actually don't expect Kevin Lee to be as smart as we want him to be and take down Rafael dos Anjos and just grind on him for 5 rounds. The other thing is, I don't know that he can. He's a wrestler submission fighter. He's not a pure wrestler like Usman and Covington are. So I don't think he can keep up a 5 round pace of just grappling. And when he takes a step back to breathe, when he takes a step back to collect himself, and he gives Rafael dos Anjos those openings, dos Anjos doesn't stop. He's a crisp, perfectionist striker, and he hits freaking hard. I think Rafael dos Anjos wins this. I think that Kevin Lee has fallen short every time he's had that big step up in competition. He's just fallen short. He has never beat anybody at the top end of his division, and he's lost every time he's had the opportunity. Now he's jumping up to 170 pounds, and instead of taking a decent fight for him at 170, instead of taking an entry-level fight for him at 170, he's facing arguably the number 3 guy in the division, and in my opinion, a very bad matchup for him, because Rafael dos Anjos has done nothing but train takedown defense for the last 2 years. He's going to make Kevin Lee stand and strike with him, and we saw what Barboza did to Kevin Lee when he stood and struck with him. Rafael dos Anjos may not be quite the level of Barboza, but he's no walk in the park if you stand and strike with that guy. He's got 5 KO wins himself. He can get it done. And he's also a legitimate, dangerous Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. So if this does hit the ground, he will know how to defend. Much like Al Iaquinta, he will be able to get back up to his feet, and he may even have the ability to scramble and put it on Kevin Lee on the mat because he is a legit submission artist. I think Rafael dos Anjos has fought the higher level of competition. He's more well-rounded. Yes, he's 34, but I think he's got so much gas in the tank. He does not have that much wear and tear on him. Even in his wins, he has not taken harsh beatings like a lot of these guys that you see. Look back at his record. He lost to Khabib in 2014, and then he went on a 5-fight win streak. He lost to Alvarez and Ferguson, and then he went on a 3-fight win streak. And then he lost to the number 1 and number 2 guys. So you can't look at those 2 losses and tell me, oh, he's done, man. He's faded. He's old. He's washed up. He lost to the number 1 guy, the champion at 155. He lost to the legitimate 155 potential champion. And then he lost to the champion at 170 and the number 1 contender at 170. Only the very pinnacle of either division is able to beat Rafael dos Anjos. I do not think Kevin Lee is a title holder. I do not think he's a future title holder. I think Rafael dos Anjos welcomes him to the 170-pound division with another big fat loss. I can hear you all right now. You're like, Clint, what kind of freaking podcast is that? You don't give us anything to work with. No picks. Well, I'm sorry, guys. This is a really tough card. And coming off of 2 losing weeks, I'm not in the position to roll the dice and rapid fire all over the place. Don't worry. I got you covered, though. I've got some leans for you. For the official picks, we are going to play Ian Heinz at plus 160. Follow me on Twitter. That's where you get the juiciest lines when I play a dog like that. We're going to play RDA, Rafael dos Anjos, in the main event at minus 111. We are going to parlay Pat Cummings and Aspen Ladd. That parlay comes out to about minus 120. And I do like that because, like I said, both of those lines are a little too wide, but I'm pretty sure that they both get it done. We are just going to have those 3 official picks for this card. However, keep an eye on my Twitter. I am going to be looking at totals as these fights get closer. I have several leans on totals that I will want to hit you guys with once they drop. They are not out at the time of recording. I have a lean to Megan Anderson, and I have a lean to Zach Cummings, depending on how he looks at the weigh-ins and depending on if that line gets any juicier. If you have any questions, if you want me to break down any other fights a little more, hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on YouTube, give me a 5-star rating, share the podcast, show me some love. Thank you all for the support. Let's right this ship. Let's get it back. Let's roll.